My name is George, I'm 63 years old, and I died on August 1st. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. I met Jesus, and he showed me 6 signs you carry a dangerous anointing. If you've ever felt like your whole life has been one long battle, if you've wondered why everything seems harder for you than everyone else, you need to hear this. Because what Jesus showed me on the other side wasn't just for me. It was for you. A gavel is a piece of wood. That's all it is, a small wooden hammer, and the man you just heard held one nearly every working day for 38 years and decided what happened to people with it. I keep turning that over because in what he's about to describe, he's the one standing in front of somebody with a question he can't answer. No bench, no robe, nothing in his hand. I'm Zeke, and I read the accounts people send me here. This one came from a judge in Chicago, and I'll tell you which piece of it made me sit up. It isn't the light and it isn't the voice. It's a case from 15 years ago where he stopped a sentencing over a feeling he couldn't explain to anyone in that room. What happened a week later is the reason I'm reading this out loud, and I'll point at it when we get there. So, a piece of wood and a man who has to answer a question for once. I served as a judge in the municipal court for 38 years. I've sat behind that heavy wooden bench, gripped the gavel, and looked down at the brokenness of the world every single day. I've seen people at their lowest, but I never expected it would be me on that hospital bed. It happened during a routine surgery. Gallbladder removal. Simple procedure, except my heart stopped twice. The second time, I didn't come back right away. And in those minutes, I went somewhere else. The air in that hospital room had been heavy with the smell of antiseptic and the low, steady hum of machines. I remember the coldness of the surgical table and the way the bright lights above me seemed to blur into a single blinding white dot as the anesthesia took hold. But when my heart stopped, that coldness didn't just vanish. It was replaced by a warmth that felt like it was coming from inside my own bones. I wasn't just a body anymore. I was something lighter. Something that didn't know the weight of age or the ache of 38 years of legal burdens. As I hovered there looking down at the frantic movements of the surgeons, I felt no fear. I watched a nurse reach for the crash cart, her face a mask of professional urgency, but I was already moving away. The walls of the operating room didn't just fade, they dissolved like mist in the morning sun. I found myself standing in a place that defied every law of physics I'd ever studied. The ground beneath me wasn't soil or stone. It was like walking on a foundation of pure, solid light. The colors were the most striking thing. On Earth, we see a narrow spectrum, but here there were shades I have no names for. Colors that carried their own music, hues that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of a living heart. That is when I saw him. He didn't approach me. It was more like I was suddenly aware that he had always been there, waiting for the noise of the world to fall silent so I could finally see. He wasn't wearing a crown or a royal robe. He wore a simple garment that looked like it was woven from the very light that filled the sky. When our eyes met, I felt the weight of every secret I'd ever kept, every judgment I'd ever passed, and every tear I'd ever shed. But there was no condemnation. There was only a profound, overwhelming sense of being known. "George," he said, and his voice wasn't a sound that hit my ears. It was a vibration that resonated through my entire being. "Do you know why your life has been so hard?" Stay on the question he's just been handed. Do you know why your life has been so hard? I've turned that sentence around a few ways, and here's where I keep landing. Nobody asks it unless there's an answer waiting. If there's no answer, you don't ask. And of all people, the man being asked spent his whole career on the other side of that, the one who decides whether the person in front of him is telling the truth. Now it's reversed, and he's got nothing prepared. I'd want to argue first. I'm fairly sure I would. He doesn't argue. What he admits instead is smaller and more honest than I was ready for. I stood there, a man who had spent decades demanding answers from witnesses and defendants, and I found myself speechless. I thought of the long nights in Chicago, the freezing winters where the wind seemed to howl with a personal vendetta against me. I thought of the endless paperwork, the faces of the broken people who passed through my courtroom, and the feeling that I was always rowing against a tide that never turned. I began to weep, and as the tears fell, they didn't feel like sorrow. They felt like a release of decades of tension. "I thought I was just unlucky," I whispered. "I thought maybe I wasn't strong enough, or maybe I was being punished for things I didn't even remember doing." Jesus smiled, and in that smile, I saw the birth of stars and the mending of broken hearts. "No, George, you were being prepared. You have carried a weight because you carry a flame that the darkness cannot stand. I want to show you what that looks like, so when you go back, you will never doubt the purpose of your pain again." He took a step toward me, and suddenly the scenery shifted. We were no longer standing in that garden of light. We were standing in a small, cramped apartment in Chicago. I recognized it instantly. It was the place where I grew up. I saw myself as a tiny infant, barely a few pounds, lying in a makeshift crib. I saw the shadows in the corners of the room, not physical shadows, but a spiritual darkness that seemed to be watching that crib with a hungry, desperate intensity. A heater that malfunctioned. That's the piece I want to hold up to the light. He's standing in the apartment where he was a baby, and the thing he points at isn't a monster in the corner. It's a broken heater, and a sickness that nearly finished him before he had a name. Turn it one way, and that's a hard childhood in a cold city, nothing more. Turn it the other way, and someone was aiming at him. I can't work out which way to hold it, so I'm going to ask you. Is there an accident in your early life that your family still brings up? The one where by rights you shouldn't have made it? I'd like to hear about it. This is the first sign, the sign of the early attack. Look at the atmosphere of your beginning. I watched as the scene played out. I saw my mother crying over me, her prayers rising like thin ribbons of gold through a heavy, gray ceiling of oppression. I saw the accidents that almost happened, the time the heater malfunctioned, the time the sickness almost took my breath for good. I saw that I had been a target before I even knew my own name. The enemy doesn't waste his arrows on those who are no threat, Jesus explained. He saw the oil I placed on your head before you were even formed in the womb. He tried to snuff out your light in the cradle because he knew what that light would do to his kingdom once you reached the bench. If your life started with a battle for your very survival, it is because you were born with a dangerous anointing. The darkness tried to kill the seed because it was terrified of the harvest. I felt a surge of understanding. All those years I'd felt like I was dodging invisible bullets. I actually was. I saw a vision of a great lion pacing outside the door of my childhood home, unable to enter because of a wall of fire that surrounded the perimeter. That fire wasn't mine. It was the protection that comes with the mark. Many people think their childhood trauma is just a series of bad events, Jesus continued as we walked through the memory. But for those with this calling, it is a focused campaign. If you survived what should have destroyed you, if you are still standing after the storms of your youth tried to wash you away, it is because the hand of the Father was heavier than the hand of the enemy. The scene shifted again. Now I was a young man in my 20s. I was sitting in a crowded room at a university function. There was laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. I saw myself sitting on the edge of a sofa, looking around with a strange sense of displacement. I looked like I belonged, but my spirit was miles away. I remember that feeling so clearly, the feeling of being an outsider in a room full of friends. Why was I always so lonely? Even when I wasn't alone, I asked. Jesus pointed to the version of me on the sofa. I saw a faint, shimmering glow surrounding my younger self. It wasn't a halo. It was more like a barrier. I saw people approach me, and as they got close, they would suddenly feel uncomfortable. They would make an excuse and walk away. Some would look at me with unexplained irritation. "This is the second sign," he said. "The sign of divine separation. I set you apart, George. I set you at Tina Sack not because I wanted you to be lonely, but because I needed your ears to be tuned to my frequency, not the frequency of the world. You couldn't blend in because you were meant to stand out. When you carry this level of anointing, you are like a different chemical element. You don't mix. You don't react the same way others do." I watched as my younger self turned down an invitation to a party that I knew, in hindsight, had led to a terrible scandal for everyone involved. I saw the way I spent my Friday nights, often alone with my books, or just walking the streets of the city, talking to God without even realizing that's what I was doing. People called you arrogant, Jesus said with a gentle laugh. They called you too good for them. But it wasn't pride. It was the oil. It creates a friction with those who are comfortable in the dark. You were being preserved from the patterns of your generation. I had to keep you in the secret place so that when I gave you the gavel, your heart would still be mine. He showed me a vision of a great forest where all the trees were swaying in the same direction, caught in a powerful wind. But there was one tree in the center that stood perfectly still, its roots going deep into a hidden spring. That was you, he said. The wind of culture and the pressure of peers couldn't move you because your roots were drinking from a different source. This is why you never fit in. This is why you always felt like a stranger in your own hometown. You were being consecrated for a purpose that required you to be untainted by the compromises of the men around you. More than a few people have described this to me, and it always comes out in the same shape. Not that anyone was cruel, but that people came close and then cooled off. A conversation that ends early. Invitations that stop arriving. Separate lives, identical picture. What I've never had before is the tree. A whole forest leaning in the wind and one trunk in the middle not moving because its roots are down in some other water. That picture is his, not mine, and I'm still holding it up and turning it. A man can be steady and lonely at the same moment. I'm not convinced that difference is something anybody can see from the outside, including you about yourself. I looked at the young George on the sofa and felt a deep sense of peace. I had spent so many years trying to fix my social awkwardness, not realizing it was actually a badge of honor. I wasn't broken, I was reserved. I wasn't a misfit, I was a specialist being trained for a specific war. The more dangerous the mission, Jesus whispered, the more intense the isolation in the training phase. You felt the sting of being left out, but I was actually shielding you from being led astray. You were never alone, George. I was always the one sitting on that sofa with you, even when you couldn't see me. Jesus took my hand again, and the garden of light seemed to expand, stretching out until the horizon was nothing but a sea of gold. He looked at me with eyes that saw every scar on my soul. Yet he looked at me with more pride than a father looking at his newborn son. George, he said, the oil I give is not just for you to feel good, it's for you to do work. But before that work can be done, the vessel must be broken in specific ways. Come, look at this. Suddenly, the gold beneath our feet turned into a dark, rainy evening in a neighborhood I knew well. I saw myself, maybe 10 years ago, sitting in my car outside a restaurant. I looked older, tired, and there were tears streaming down my face. I remembered that night. I had just found out that a man I had mentored, a man I had treated like a brother, had been working behind my back to smear my reputation so he could take my seat on the bench. This is the third sign, Jesus said, his voice low and steady. The sign of the broken trust. You asked me many times why people you loved always seemed to be the ones who hurt you the most. You wondered if there was something about you that invited betrayal. I watched as the younger me leaned my head against the steering wheel, sobbing. I felt that old familiar ache in my chest. It felt like a knife in the back every single time, I whispered. I thought I was a bad judge of character. I thought I was just foolish for trusting people. Jesus shook his head, and as he did, the scene shifted. I saw the person who had betrayed me, but I didn't see him as a man. I saw the spiritual forces moving behind him. It was like watching a puppet show where the strings were made of envy and fear. I saw that when this man looked at me, he didn't see a friend. He saw a light that made his own darkness feel uncomfortable. When you carry a dangerous anointing, Jesus explained, betrayal is a tool used to refine your heart. The enemy knows he can't stop the oil from flowing, so he tries to make the oil bitter. He wants you to become cynical. He wants you to build walls around your heart so that my love can't flow through you. But look closer, George. Look at what happened to you after that betrayal. Something moves here, and it took me a second pass to see what. Until now, he's been asking why. Now he's being shown a man he mentored, quietly working to take his seat, with strings of envy running up out of the scene like a puppet show. That's a brutal thing to be shown about somebody you love like a brother. But watch which direction this goes from a parked car and a steering wheel, because it doesn't go toward revenge. I braced for revenge. I'd have understood revenge. What he does instead is the actual hinge of this whole account. And if you've been sold out by someone you trained yourself, you'll know how rare it is. I watched the vision continue. After that man had tried to ruin me, I didn't fight back with his weapons. I didn't go to the press. I didn't plot revenge. Instead, I spent more time on my knees. I saw a vision of myself in my private study, surrounded by law books and the Bible, praying for the man who had hurt me. As I prayed, I saw a liquid gold, the oil, pouring out of my heart and filling the room. The betrayal was the press, Jesus said. It was the weight that squeezed the purest oil out of you. You had to learn that your validation doesn't come from the applause of men or the loyalty of friends. It comes from me alone. The dangerous ones are the ones who have been betrayed and yet refuse to hate. They are the ones who have been let down by everyone on earth, only to find that I am the only one who stays. If you have been walked out on, lied to, and discarded by those you trusted, it is a sign that you are being trained to lean only on the everlasting arms. The scene changed again, almost instantly. Now we were standing in the back of my courtroom. I saw the heavy wooden doors swing open. I saw myself, dressed in the black robes, walking toward the bench. But this time, I wasn't seeing it through human eyes. I saw the spiritual atmosphere of the room. It was like a thick gray fog was swirling around the lawyers and the gallery, a fog of anxiety, lies, and confusion. But as soon as my foot touched the floor of the courtroom, a pulse of light went out from me. It was like a shockwave. I saw the gray fog pull back to the corners of the room. I saw the lawyers stop their whispering. I saw a man in the front row, a hardened criminal, suddenly lower his head and begin to tremble. "This is the fourth sign," Jesus said, and his voice carried a new weight of authority. The sign of the shifting atmosphere. Have you noticed, George, how the room changes when you walk in? Have you noticed how people who were just laughing and joking suddenly become serious? Or how the chaotic energy of a place suddenly settles into a heavy silence? There's a message I got some months ago from a woman who told me she can't stay in a crowded room longer than an hour. And not nerves, she said. She comes home from church on a Sunday and has to lie down in a dark room, and she's never had a word for it. I filed that away and didn't do much with it. This stretch put it straight back in front of me because he's describing the same tiredness and giving it a cause. Not age, not nerves, but something being spent while he stands there. I'm turning that over again, and honestly, I preferred my old explanation. It was simpler. This one asks more of me. I thought back to all the times I had walked into a restaurant, a store, or even a church, and felt like I was bringing a weight with me. People would tell me I was intense, or that I had a strong presence. I always thought it was just my personality, or maybe the fact that I was a judge. "It's not the robe, George, and it's not your title," Jesus said, smiling at my confusion. "It is the weight of the glory I have placed upon you." Dangerous people don't have to say a word to change the environment. Their very presence demands a response from the spirit realm. The darkness in that room has to bow because the light you carry is not a flickering candle. It is a furnace. If you find that your presence makes people uncomfortable without you saying a word, or if you find that people start confessingly things to you that they've never told anyone else, it's because the oil on your life is drawing the truth to the surface. He showed me a vision of a dark forest at night. In the middle of the forest, there was a man holding a torch. The light didn't just illuminate the path, it made the wolves and the predators scatter into the deep brush. "You are that torch," he said. "The enemy hates when you show up because you end the confusion. You bring a clarity that forces people to choose. This is why you feel so tired after being in large crowds. You are constantly pushing back the darkness just by standing there. You are a territorial spirit, George. I have given you the authority to claim the ground you walk on for my kingdom." Then, the air around us seemed to ripple, like water in a pond. Jesus looked at me with a gaze that felt like it was piercing through time itself. "And because you carry that weight, I had to give you a way to see what others miss. This is the fifth sign, the sign of the opened eye." The vision shifted to a scene I had almost forgotten. It was a case from 15 years ago. A young woman was accused of a crime she didn't commit. All the evidence pointed to her guilt. The lawyers were certain. My own clerks told me it was an open and shut case. But I remember sitting there, looking at her and seeing something else. I didn't see a criminal. I saw a chain around her neck that wasn't made of metal. I saw a shadow behind the witness who was testifying against her. This is the case I told you about. A young woman, every piece of evidence pointing at her, his own clerks saying it's finished, and he holds the sentencing on a feeling. Think about what that costs a man in that chair. There's no line on any form for I have a bad feeling about this. He irritated everybody in that building, and he did it anyway. A week later, they arrest somebody else. I've been back through that paragraph 5 or 6 times now. Turn it one way, it's a careful judge with good instincts. Turn it the other, it's exactly what he says it is. That's the one thing in here I haven't been able to reason away, and I've tried. I remembered the feeling I had, a knowing that went deeper than logic. I had delayed the sentencing, much to everyone's frustration, and a week later, the real perpetrator was caught. You thought it was just a hunch or good instincts, Jesus said, but look at what was really happening. He showed me the courtroom from a different angle. I saw myself on the bench, but I saw a thin silver cord connecting my spirit to the heart of the woman. I saw that I was seeing the truth through his eyes. I saw the lies coming out of the witness's mouth as black smoke, and I saw the woman's innocence as a soft white glow. A dangerous anointing always comes with the gift of sight, Jesus explained. I give you the ability to see through the masks. I give you dreams that warn you of things coming. I give you a check in your spirit when something is wrong, even when everything looks perfect on the surface. You aren't crazy, and you aren't just highly sensitive. You are a seer. I have given you the eyes of a watchman so you can protect the sheep and identify the wolves. I saw a vision of a high tower on a cliff. I was standing at the top, looking out over a vast ocean. I could see the storms brewing hundreds of miles away long before they reached the shore. I could see the hidden rocks beneath the waves that would wreck the ships. This gift is a burden, Jesus said softly. It means you will often see the trouble before it arrives. You will feel the pain of others before they even speak. But do not fear this gift. It is the intelligence I give to my generals. Use it to pray. Use it to speak the truth when everyone else is falling for the lie. You have been given the vision to see the spiritual roots of physical problems. I felt a rush of gratitude. I thought of all the times I had felt weird for knowing things I shouldn't know, or for sensing a person's character within seconds of meeting them. It wasn't a curse, it was a tool. But there is one more sign, Jesus said, and his face took on a look of such profound love that it almost hurt to look at him. The hardest sign of all, and for this we must look at the fire. Jesus stood silent for a moment, and the very air seemed to hold its breath. The garden of light began to fade, replaced by a scene that was far more rugged. We were standing at the base of a great ancient mountain. The slopes were covered in gnarled olive trees, their silver-green leaves shimmering in a twilight that felt both heavy and holy. In the center of this grove sat a massive stone structure, an ancient olive press, the kind they used thousands of years ago. "This is the 6th sign, George," he said, his voice echoing against the stone. "The sign of the great pressing. You have often asked why the fires of your life were so hot and why the weight was so heavy. You wondered why, just when you thought you could catch your breath, another wave would come to pull you under." He gestured toward the press. I saw myself there, not as a man, but as a harvest. I saw the moments of my life being gathered like fruit. I saw the day my father died in that Chicago street, the cold rain mixing with the tears on my 7-year-old face. I saw the long, agonizing years of my cancer treatment, the way my body felt like a foreign country that had been invaded and occupied. I saw the empty nursery after we lost our infant son, a room that felt like a vacuum of silence that threatened to swallow my entire world. Every time you were crushed, George, you thought you were being destroyed, Jesus said, his hand resting on the heavy wooden beam of the press. But look at what was actually happening. As the heavy stone moved over the olives in the vision, I didn't see pulp or waste. I saw a golden liquid beginning to flow. It was thick, fragrant, and it glowed with a light of its own. It didn't just drip, it surged. This oil is the dangerous anointing, he explained. It cannot be bought and it cannot be inherited. It can only be pressed out. The enemy brought the fire to consume you, but I used the fire to refine you. The enemy brought the weight to break you, but I used the weight to extract the power. The deeper the suffering, the more potent the oil. You carry a level of authority that only comes to those who have lost everything and found that I was still there. You are dangerous to the darkness because you have reached a place where the world has nothing left to take from you. You are not afraid of the valley because you have lived there and found my table spread in the midst of it. I watched as the golden oil from my life's sorrows began to flow down the mountain, turning into a river of fire that illuminated the dark valleys below. I saw people standing in that river, people who were broken, sick, and hopeless. As the oil touched them, their chains fell off. Their eyes brightened. They found the strength to stand. The ground moves right here, and I want to slow down for it. He isn't being taught a lesson now. He's being shown an inventory, a 7-year-old in cold rain the day his father didn't come home. The cancer years when his own body felt like occupied territory. A nursery with nothing in it. 3 of the worst things that can land on a man set side by side like fruit brought in from a field. I don't think anyone should be comfortable here. I'm not. But notice he never once says the pain was good. He says something was drawn out of it, which is a different claim altogether. And that difference is what I keep turning. You were never suffering for nothing, Jesus whispered. You were being filled with a substance that can heal nations. The bankruptcy that took your pride, the illness that took your strength, the grief that took your heart. Each one was a turn of the stone to ensure the oil was pure. There is no shortcut to this, George. The most dangerous weapons in my hand are the ones who have been through the fire and didn't come out smelling like smoke. He then showed me a vision of the city of Chicago, but it wasn't the city I knew from the bench. It was a spiritual landscape. I saw the courtrooms, the streets, and the homes. I saw dark, heavy chains draped over the buildings, representing the cycles of poverty, violence, and despair. Then I saw myself walking down the street. I wasn't carrying a gavel or a law book. I was just walking. But as I walked, the ground beneath my feet began to glow with that same golden oil. Everywhere I stepped, the chains on the buildings began to crack and shatter. You think you were just a judge, Jesus said, looking out over the city, but you were a gatekeeper. I placed you in that court not just to interpret the laws of man, but to release the justice of heaven. Every time you showed mercy when the world demanded judgment, every time you spoke truth into a lie, you were releasing the oil. The darkness hates you because you are a walking demolition crew for the strongholds of the enemy. He moved closer to me, and I felt a surge of strength that I hadn't felt in decades. It was as if every year of age and every ounce of pain was being rewritten into a new kind of power. The world is full of people who want the platform, George, but very few are willing to endure the press. You have endured, you have stayed the course, and now the oil is ready. You aren't just a man who survived a heart attack. You are a man who has been commissioned in the throne room. He showed me a final vision, a vast assembly of people, thousands upon thousands, who looked just like me. They were men and women who had been through the fire. They were people who had been betrayed, isolated, and crushed by the weight of life. They were all standing in a line, and each one carried a vessel of that golden oil. Tell them, George, he said, his voice rising like a trumpet. Tell the ones who are in the middle of the pressing. Tell the ones who feel like they are being squeezed until they have nothing left. Tell them the oil is coming. Tell them that their pain is not a sign of my absence, but a sign of my preparation. Tell them they are dangerous. Tell them to stop apologizing for the fire and start using the flame. The light began to grow even brighter, swirling around us until everything else vanished. I felt a sudden, sharp pull, like a hook in my chest. I looked at Jesus one last time, and he reached out and touched my forehead. The warmth was so intense it felt like I was being branded. Go back, he said. The gavel is still in your hand, but now you know whose authority you really carry. The fire didn't destroy you, George. It revealed you. The next thing I knew, the silence of the garden was replaced by a roar of sound. It was the sound of my own lungs fighting for air. It was the rhythmic mechanical beep of the heart monitor. It was the frantic voices of the ICU staff. I felt the coldness of the world again, the ache in my chest where they had worked to bring me back, and the heavy weight of my physical body. But inside, that warmth remained. The gold was still there. If you've listened to this, maybe you recognize yourself. Maybe you've wondered why you never fit in, or why your life has been a series of fires. You're not ordinary. You're not surviving by luck. You've been marked, you've been chosen, you carry a dangerous anointing, and it's time to let it burn. The world doesn't need comfortable people anymore. It needs the warriors. This journey reminds us that the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity to find redemptive meaning, even in the most isolating experiences. When we face profound adversity, be it loss, illness, or the feeling of being an outsider, our minds often search for a framework that transforms that pain into a sense of purpose. Whether we view these fires as a spiritual refining process or a psychological forging of resilience, the result is the same. A person who emerges with a deeper sense of empathy and a more grounded presence. This narrative suggests that our greatest struggles might not be obstacles to our calling, but the very things that qualify us to lead and heal others. It invites us to reconsider our own scars, not as evidence of defeat, but as markers of a strength that is both rare and vital. By reframing our personal battles as a form of preparation, we move away from a mindset of being a victim of circumstance and toward a realization of our own inner authority. It is a call to recognize that the very things that made our lives hard are the things that have made us capable of making a difference in a world that often feels cold and indifferent. What stays with me is the wooden hammer again. Right at the end, seconds before the noise of that ICU takes him back, he's told the gavel is still in his hand. He simply knows now whose authority he's been holding it under. Nothing about his life changes. Same court, same bench, same paperwork. Only the account of it changes. If you've spent years doing plain work you assumed nobody was watching, I hope that sits down next to you for a minute tonight. It's the most comforting thing in here, and it's also the smallest. What I don't have is the other side of that room. He wakes up with the warmth still in him and 6 signs he can't prove to a living soul. And then, somewhere past where this account ends, he has to say all of it out loud to the people in his own house, to the wife who stood in that empty nursery with him, to men who'd worked in that building for 30 years. He doesn't tell us how that went. That's the account I need next, not the light, not the voice, the kitchen table afterward. So if you've had something like this and you had to carry it home, who believed you? Who went quiet on you? Did you stop telling it? Tell me, and don't tidy it up on my account. What people send is the first thing I read and the closest thing I have to a second opinion. George says he came back branded with a warmth on his forehead he could still feel. I'd like to hear from you what a person does with a mark nobody else can see.